and welcome. Thanks for coming out tonight. Greg Power, the superintendent here at Old Miami. About a year ago, we started a process of looking at what our needs were going to be for facilities as we grow. Enrollment as of today is 4,883 students. And I think we're still enrolling a number of students as we get to the end of August here. So it looks like we're going to break 4,900 students in enrollment in very short order. One of the trends that we've seen over the last few years is that typically you get an enrollment that grows during the summer and then enrollment slows during the school year. The thing that we've seen over the last few years is that the enrollment continues through the school year. So we grew about 195 kids last year. Right now we're at about 223. So we're on the upper projection as far as our growth. Down by the intermediate building, there's a 11.83 acre tract that a developer just put in. It's going to put 47 houses on that 11.83 acre tract. So there's a lot of building going on, get a lot of house for the money out here. So that's kind of the current climate that we're dealing with as far as people moving into the district and bringing their kids to come to school here. Tonight, we've been working with two of our architectural firms, Immersion Design and Fanning Howie. And tonight, Christy, Troy, and Terry are here to give an update regarding our master facility plan. So we'll start that now with Christy, and afterwards, if you have questions, we'll be available out in the lobby.
Shorter than Greg. Good evening. We are really excited to be here. We're here to be able to show everybody a little bit of the journey that we have traveled together over the last year, and also show everybody kind of where we landed in terms of the master plan and exactly what our bond levy that we're going after here is going to be buying us. So I'm going to walk, if you've been at community meetings in the past, you're going to see some stuff that you've already seen. But I want to make sure that even for the newcomers, we really walk through the history and how we got to where we are. So where have we been? Hopefully most people can read down the left side of the screen, but we've had a lot of meetings, a lot of group sessions, a lot of conversations, many hours of planning. So just to recap some of the things that we've done, we've had Morrow community meeting, we've had 2 all community meetings here. We sent out a survey almost a year ago, last November, where we got an amazing response of over 1,100 to that survey that had a lot of different questions diving into where the community wanted to see Little Miami go in the future. After those community meetings, we had smaller focus group sessions back in January. We had focus group sessions with community members. We had focus group sessions with students. The students were amazing. We sat down with them and talked about kind of their dream for school. We had focus group meetings with staff and the BAC. Through those community meetings and those focus group meetings, and I'll get to this in a little bit, we did review different options for a master plan, and we did kind of narrow in on one specific option. Once we got down pretty close to that specific option, then we started to have a lot of Board of Education work sessions. And I think we have probably most of our Board of Ed members here, so they can vouch for the number of board work sessions we had, really hashing through what we heard from the community to develop a plan that we felt was right for the Little Miami community. We spent a lot of time talking in those focus group meetings and in community meetings about what we want the future of schools to look like. I'm not going to go in detail with these, but we talked about what school environment should be. We talked about giving personalized spaces to students, creating collaboration spaces for students, making sure that our buildings were well connected in terms of technology. We talked about making sure our buildings had flexibility so that in the future, as curriculum delivery continues to change, that we don't have to keep going back and doing modifications to our buildings, but there's flexibility built in from the beginning to allow us to make modifications easily as we go. We talked about transparency in our buildings and the benefits of transparency in our buildings, but then we also talked about how transparency means we need to make sure that we have a really good understanding of security in our buildings. So we spent a lot of time talking about how can you have both of those and make sure that both meet everybody's expectations. We talked about equity in our classrooms and making sure that our learning spaces in the future are designed to accommodate all of our learners. If we have any teachers in the room, they can attest to the fact that we've got a lot of kiddos that learn a lot of different ways. And unfortunately, a lot of our classrooms only cater to the kids that are auditory learners. They do well sitting in a row listening to a teacher at the front of the room. But that's only a fraction of our kids. So we need to make sure that our classrooms can also support our visual learners and our kinesthetic learners as well. So we spent some time talking about what that meant in your existing facilities and in potential new facilities. So now I'm going to walk through some of the other tasks that we did. First was the enrollment projection. And wow, what a task for you guys to go through an enrollment projection. In order to do a good, thoughtful enrollment projection, we had to look pretty far back and really take a look at the growth of the district. So what this graph is showing is what your enrollment has done since 2006. And there's some obvious things that we need to recognize. You know, we had a big decrease there for a few years when we went into fiscal emergency, so we need to take that into account when we're looking at enrollment projections. We had a recession in there. The interesting thing that we need to think about with a recession is a lot of times, if you're a school district that is completely built out, where you don't have a lot of empty land, a recession might actually mean that your enrollment goes up as a public school district, because parochial school parents might be pulling their kids out and putting them in public schools. But when you're Little Miami and you're only built out about 25%, a recession means that people aren't going to be building houses. So that recession hits someone pretty hard like Little Miami, as opposed to another smaller school district that's already built out. So those are some of the things that we took into account in order to come up with projected enrollment. We looked at all of the land in Little Miami. We looked at how developable it is and took that into account. Ultimately, at the end of the day, that meant coming up with 3 different scenarios of where we think your enrollment could go. We had the scenario A, the most likely, that's the one that you see in red. Okay, so when I go to the next chart that shows our projected enrollment, it's that red track right in the middle. We had a high projection and we had a low projection. This is that middle of the road enrollment projection. Even at middle of the road, you can see how quickly Little Miami's enrollment is growing. That green line across the middle is your building capacity. So you can see how soon we are at capacity and then way surpassing the capacity of the existing school buildings in Little Miami. So here's our enrollment chart for the next, from almost 15, 16 years out. And you can see that this enrollment projection is looking at around 200 students of growth a year. Now, with all of that said, we had projected last year enrollments ending around 4649, and we ended at 4680. This year's enrollment projection we thought was going to be around 4837, and as Greg told you, we are currently tracking at 4900, and we will still continue to grow throughout the year. So the reality is right now, we are really on that green enrollment track, not the red. The other thing that we did in our master planning effort is we did go and we did physical building assessments of all the buildings. I'm not going to go in detail about the results of every single building, but what you can see on this chart, when you see the percentage listed, the FCI value is the amount of money that we really need to put into these buildings immediately. There are some things in some of the older buildings that need to be addressed as soon as possible. The RI value looks out a little bit further, knowing that there's going to be routine maintenance and things that in a few years are going to need to be fixed. So when you see, we'll take Salem, the very first one, where you see Salem, RI value is 72%. What that 72% means is that we are going to spend 72% of the cost to build a brand new replacement building just to keep the existing building up and going as it currently is, okay? If we wanted to go into Salem and reprogram it, if we wanted to move walls, if we wanted to make bathrooms that weren't ADA accessible, if we wanted to make modifications to that building, that would be above and beyond that 72%. So when we look at these percentages, as soon as we start getting up into that 60, 65, 66%, we really want to be thinking about replacing those buildings. Because certainly by the time you add that additional projects that you want to do to those buildings, it's going to ultimately cost more to keep the older buildings than it would be to build a brand new building. The other thing we did is we walked your buildings and we did what we call educational assessments. So what this is we're walking the building, we're not looking at whether a pipe is leaking or whether a floor is worn out. We are looking at how the teachers are teaching in the building and how well that actual building supports how they want to deliver education. So when the first set of slides where we talked about flexibility, adaptability, small group spaces, large group spaces, those are the types of things we're looking for when we do an educational assessment of the building. There's a lot of back data to this, so this is simply a summary sheet. But again, you can see that your older buildings are scoring pretty poor in terms of the teachers being able to deliver curriculum how they would like to be able to deliver in a 21st century manner. Your newer buildings are a 4. Why aren't they a 5? Well, the reason they're not a 5 is because the reality is curriculum delivery has changed dramatically just in the last, I would say, 5 years. And so the reality is any building that's over 5 years, there could be a little bit of improvement to that building in order to allow those teachers to deliver curriculum how they want. A 4 is still a great score, so I don't want anybody to be, upset that we have a newer intermediate. Why isn't it a 5? Well, that's the reason why. Wanted to cover a couple of the bullet points that we heard in our focus group sessions. These sessions were really good because it allowed us to work with smaller groups of folks and really take a deep dive and have thoughtful conversations into the options that we have presented in the community meetings. Some of the things we heard in terms of the elementary schools. There is a desire to reduce the number of building transitions. So what does building transition mean? It means, right now, a lot of times you'll have a child that goes to a building and they're only there for 2 years, and then they're on to another building and they're only in that building for 2 years. So what we heard is that the desire is to really reduce that number so that you're not having to ask your kiddos to transition so often. Because with each transition, of course, that brings some stress on our kids and on our staff. There was a desire to ensure equity across our schools. We don't want to have a first grader or a second grader that has an experience in one school be vastly different from a first grader or second grader in another school. We want to make sure that all the kids in Little Miami benefit from the same advantages and same great learning environments. So what does that mean in order to ensure equity across the schools? It really means taking the older elementary buildings ultimately offline so that we can get those kids in an educational environment that really allows the staff to be able to teach the way that ultimately they want to teach. In terms of high school discussion, a lot of discussion around the high school, a lot of discussion around the size that a high school should be, and at what point is there a point where a high school is too big and we need to think about having 2 high schools instead of 1 high school. So we did have a lot of conversation around that. There does seem to be a tipping point where the high school will be too big. Is it going to happen in the immediate future? No. So the reality is this is a conversation that we're willing to put off for a little bit, but just know that in a little while, several years down the road, we are probably going to want to revisit that conversation. Some other bullet points in terms of the high school was that there was an acknowledgement that the existing high school site is pretty tight. And in terms of having the ability to expand this building to accommodate more and more students, it's limited. And so we do need to start thinking at some point about a new high school and a new site for that high school because of the constraints that we have on this site. And I've got a diagram where I can walk through that a little bit. So ultimately, at the end of our community meetings and focus group meetings, we seemed to narrow down to a preferred option. And that preferred option is what you see up on the screen. And at the end of those community meetings, it looked like we were moving in the direction of taking the older elementaries offline so that we could create those new elementary spaces that are needed. So in this option, you see 2 new elementary buildings being built was the desire. Keeping the existing intermediate, of course, keeping the existing junior high, but then building a new high school, recognizing that at some point we're going to run out of room on this site to keep expanding this high school. So to go ahead and build a new high school, and what that would allow us to do is it would allow this building to then become a middle school building. And so that was phase 1. With then phase 2, once we had those 3 new buildings online in phase 1, phase 2 would simply be adding additions to the buildings that you have to react to whatever the enrollment growth might be. You can see that this option is still keeping 1 high school because, again, we aren't there yet where we need to have that conversation about how big is too big for your high school. So once we had this option, then of course we start looking at the dollars associated with it. And you can see that the dollars for everything that everybody asked for total up to $126 million. And that does not include a needed new transportation facility. It does not include a new athletic complex. If we're going to build a new high school, then the thought would be that you would need a new athletic complex to go with that high school. So that 126 doesn't include those 2 pieces. Phase 2 in this option, we were projecting to be between 47 and 51 million. So this is what we took to the board. And this is what we started with in order to come up with our final master plan and our current bond levy. So what we did, that 126 million, that number was, that was too high. We do have a debt limit. We have a debt limit of 64 million. And we know that. And so then it was strategizing. We knew what the community wanted, but we know we can't get there right now, all of it. So how do we take that 64 million, that is our debt limit, and what do we do first? So what we did is we took essentially that phase 1 that the community asked for and said, let's create a phase 1A and a phase 1B. Still ultimately getting to where we want to go, but we need to break that out into 2 steps that is more manageable for the community and for the taxpayers. So what are we doing in this first phase, in phase 1A? We do need a new elementary school. So the plan is to go ahead and build a new elementary school in this first phase. That elementary school would have an enrollment capacity of 800. It will serve for this first phase, which we're anticipating opening in 2021, it will serve your PK through 1 kids. Depending upon what happens with your enrollment. So you know that when we did this master plan, we were assuming that red enrollment track, that middle of the road enrollment track, if you continue on the green and are more than what we are thinking, then there's a good chance that Hamilton Mainville and Harlan Butlerville Elementary potentially will need to stay open longer so that we have the space there if your enrollment continues to grow at a more accelerated rate. So we have the new PK through 1. The intermediate school will get an addition. It will still hold 2 grade levels. So right now it happens to be 5th and 6th grade. We are proposing that the intermediate school become 2nd and 3rd grade. But of course, because of your enrollment growth, we still need to add that addition because you've got more kiddos in your class. So we're going to add an addition to that building so that it can accommodate 1,050 kids. Salem, for now, in this first phase, needs to stay open. Salem can accommodate 1,000 kids. And with the enrollment growth that we're seeing, we can't afford yet to take Salem offline. So Salem stays open, also serving 2 grades, but we're proposing 4th and 5th grade move into Salem. Why 4th and 5th grade? Because they are slightly older kids. That building is very tough for the younger kids. That building was originally designed, I believe, as your high school. And you can tell when you walk that building. It can be pretty intimidating for a little kid to try and maneuver through Salem. So that's why we're proposing the new elementary that's really designed to accommodate those early learners and put the 4th and 5th grade in Salem. The junior high, we are going to add a sizable addition. So if you remember when the junior high was built, it was always planned to almost double in enrollment, to take the big academic wing that's at the junior high and mirror it to the other side. So right now the junior high can hold 800. We are going to add an addition that allows it to hold 1,400. Because it can hold 1,400, we're able to actually make that a middle school instead of a junior high. So we can move 6th grade up into that building such that it can become a 6th, 7th, and 8th grade building. And then we have this high school, and this will stay the high school in the first phase, but we do need to add on to this building. There are definitely spaces that we are short in order to accommodate the continued enrollment growth in this building. So, phase 1B, how do we ultimately get to that desired phase 1 that the community asked for? So phase 1B, and you'll notice the dates, 2024. It's not long after phase 1A. So I just want everybody to realize that yes, we're going after a bond levy this November, but it really is only one half of the pie that we really need. The second half is Phase 1B to come a few years down the road. Phase 1B is when we are proposing to build that new high school. The additions that we're going to add to this building are going to really right-size it for just to be a 1,500 student high school. And the reality is that when Phase 1B opens, you're going to have over 1,700 high school students, maybe 1,800 if we continue on the track that we're going. So this building is going to start to feel very tight over the next few years as we continue to increase our enrollment. But we also, so when we build that new high school in Phase 1B, which is the only thing that we're really proposing in Phase 1B, is getting that new high school online. That means that this building gets freed up to become a middle school. And when we analyze the spaces in this building, and we look at the support spaces and everything inside it, it really fits very well as a middle school model. So we want to make sure that the additions that we put on in Phase 1A will also serve well as a middle school. So we've spent a lot of time sitting down with the staff, with the principals, with some of the teachers, with the athletic director, to talk about what we need for this building to become a large middle school, at the same time accommodate it as a growing high school over the next few years until a new high school is built. So when we get that new high school online in roughly 2024, and this becomes the middle school, that frees up our junior high building to become an elementary. And then we can take Salem offline. Then we no longer need that building, and now we have all of our kiddos in equitable schools. And they are all sitting in an environment that supports 21st century curriculum. It's just going to take us 2 steps to get to that point, given budgets and all of that good thing. So then Phase 2 down the road is very similar to what Phase 2 was when we came up with an option with the community. Phase 2 is simply adding additions to the buildings that we have to address enrollment growth as it continues to grow. So dollar-wise, Phase 1A is $64.6 million. Phase 1B, right now, approximately 86 to 90 million. That 86 to 90 million does not include a new transportation facility, which we would probably propose going into Phase 1B. I think Jean would desperately love a new transportation facility, and the reality is as you continue to grow as a district, of course that means more buses, and the maintenance requirement for those district vehicles is so much greater now than when your transportation facility was built in the first place. This 86 to 90 million also does not include the new high school athletic complex that we would assume we would want to build in conjunction with the new high school. So there would be some dollars added to this 86 to 90 million to cover those couple pieces. Phase 2, we're projecting at 33 to 38 million. Now again, as we move along in the years and we keep track of, and we're looking at what enrollment is doing, these phases will adjust. It could be, they could be more, it could be less. But this right now is simply what we're projecting. So I'm going to dive down into kind of the individual projects that I just talked about that make up this Phase 1A, so that you really understand what is this $64 million buying us. So that first piece was the new elementary school that we talked about, the new PK through 1 elementary school. We are proposing putting that new elementary school on the site that also has Salem Elementary. Why on that site? Because that is really the best site that the district has. When you look at the 3 older elementary school sites, Salem has the acreage that we need, and it also has a very good central location to become a district-wide PK through 1 for this first phase. So don't pay really close attention to the footprint, what you see. Oh, there you go. Sorry about that. What you see in yellow is a footprint of an elementary building. All I did was I took a building that I happen to have worked on in the past that had similar enrollment, similar size to what we would need, and I'm showing how that could fit on the site. It would be a 2-story elementary building. And as I said before, Salem needs to stay online for that first phase. So until that new high school is built, there will be 2 school buildings operating on that site. The new one serving the PK through 1, and Salem serving the 4 through 5. So we need to pay really close attention to how traffic flows on the site, how buses come and go on the site, but it's manageable. We have the football field that is located just to the left. When you look at this image, that football field can help fill in the playground space that is essentially going away because we're putting a new elementary school in the backyard of Salem. So we spent a lot of time looking at the logistics of all the different sites, and this site really stood out long-term as the site that would be perfect for that new elementary school. So the total planned square footage for this new elementary school is about 102,000 square feet. Again, we sat down with the early elementary teachers, staff, and principal. We walked through a program of spaces to ensure that we were putting in the bond levy dollars for the size building that we need. The intermediate school. If you recall, I talked about needing an addition to the intermediate school. It's not a huge addition because we're still only housing 2 grades for now in this building. That's why this addition isn't a complete mirror of the current academic wing. Now down the road, as enrollment continues to grow in this building, and as this building down the road houses more than just 2 grades, then we can talk about that addition continuing to expand out to its maximum potential. We are looking at needing 29,500 square feet for this addition. There's actually 2 additions. You can see 2 yellow areas. One is an academic core addition that will get us some additional core classrooms, an additional art room, an additional music room, special ed spaces to support the increasing population. The other addition is the gymnasium addition. When the building was originally built in the first place, it was really built with half of the gym. It was always intended to build, once the next addition came, to build that second half. And now that we're really looking at a population over 1,000 kids, you're gonna need that second half because it's gonna result in probably having 2 PE classes happening at the same time. So it will be 1 large gym, but you'll have the space that you need to be able to accommodate over 1,000 kids in that building. Junior high school site. I wanted to start with just the overall site, just so everybody could kind of get their bearings, because the junior high and high school do share 1 site. And I wanted to remind everybody about some of the limitations that we have on the site. So the areas that you see in red, those are the sensitive archaeological areas out front that we are not allowed to touch. We cannot build on them, we cannot pave on them. They have to remain grass. There is no future expansion that can happen on them. The area in blue is the floodplain. Same thing. We're not going to expand out into the floodplain either. So you can start to see that we get pretty tight around the high school, because keep in mind, every time you add kids, you have parking that has to increase. You have athletic fields that have to increase. When we have more than 1,500 kids, your gymnasium no longer is big enough. So the gym would have to get bigger. The auditorium would have to get bigger. So once you start to factor all those things in, you're really pretty much built out on this site in terms of your high school. We can get some additions to this building. So that's what you see in the yellow, and I'll dive into that here. Now, oh, that's the junior high. We're going to start with the junior high. Let's start with the junior high. So the junior high, I had said we're going to almost double the size of it as originally planned when it was built. So we're going to take the academic wing and essentially mirror it to the other side. So the area that you see in yellow is all new addition. And what we're proposing to put in that new addition is, of course, additional core classrooms. We want to get some project lab space in here and some STEM type lab spaces in here so that we're really getting, we've got middle school going in here for this first phase. We want to make sure that we're providing those middle schoolers with some really good 21st century project-based learning spaces. The existing music spaces in the junior high are inadequate for the junior high. They really struggle when it comes to band and when it comes to orchestra in this building. And so we are actually proposing in this addition, putting new music spaces in it. So what that means is it frees up the existing music spaces, which you see in green. Okay, so the music spaces right now sit right up front, which is actually perfect, because as we increase the enrollment and as we double the number of kids in this building, we really need a second administration suite to be able to support those kids. We need to be able to enhance our guidance offerings for these kids. And some of our special, our speech, our psychologists, all of those folks, we need to be able to build up that administration suite. And so what we're proposing is when you walk in that main vestibule, you essentially will have an administration suite to your right and an administration suite to your left. And depending upon who you need to see, it's right there as you walk in. So total planned addition square footage you can see is 55,000 square feet. Total planned renovated square footage is 3,000 square feet. Now let's move to the high school. So again, everything you see in yellow on the high school footprint is an addition. So what do we need to build to allow this building to stay a high school for this first phase? What this building lacks a lot of in terms of being able to deliver 21st century education are, again, those project lab spaces, the STEM type spaces. And so we want to be able to build some academic additions. Those are the two kind of squares up in the top that are extending the academic wings. We want to be able to build some larger project-based spaces back there. Those same spaces are going to be needed for a middle school when this building becomes a middle school. So these aren't spaces that are wasted on a high school. These are spaces that are just as critical in the middle school. So that's what the two squares are at the top. The U shape down at the bottom. As our enrollment increases, our cafeteria needs definitely increase. When this building, and also when this building turns into a middle school, right now we might have, let's say we have 1,500 high school students in it. At some point as a middle school, it's going to have 1,800 middle school students in it. So making sure that we expand that cafeteria is going to be really critical. So that's part of that U-shape, is creating essentially a second cafeteria on the other side of the kitchen. So you're going to have your kitchen, your existing cafeteria that's out there right now, but just on the other side of the kitchen would be a second cafeteria to be able to support the kids. Just like the junior high needs a second administration suite, as this building grows, this building needs a second administration suite. And so what we're proposing is that that second administration suite go down here at the student entrance. This is where all the kids come in anyway. So if we can arm those kids with an administration suite at that entrance, ideally the guidance support, the real student support administration suite, that's what we would like to do. And so this has square footage in there to be able to expand those support services for the kids. The other piece in this addition is an athletic component that is needed. We need, well, I'll get to why we need the athletic component Let me go through the three renovated areas. The rectangle to the left, the longer rectangle, that's a media center expansion. We really need to renovate the media center, the adjacent computer lab. There's a couple other underutilized spaces next to the media center. We really need to transform that space into a 21st century learning commons for these kids. Right now you walk in there and it's a library. And we aren't really building libraries anymore in our schools, because think about the fact that a lot of our books are going away. We still have books, but what we really need is some more collaboration spaces, some more technology spaces for the kids to be able to access throughout the day. So that green rectangle is a media center expansion renovation to create a 21st century learning commons. Again, also needed when this is a middle school. The middle school has the same needs in terms of that media center space. The green rectangle at the top right, that is currently the existing athletic weight room. Does anybody have a laser pointer? No? Okay. When you're in this building, all of the athletics tend to be consolidated in one area, and all of the music spaces tend to be consolidated in one area, except for two rooms. One is the weight room, which happens to kind of be buried within the music theater spaces. Oh, look, thanks. And one is a music room, down in the bottom right, that happens to be buried with all the athletic spaces. Ideally, we start to create areas that are more alike. So what we are proposing, and we also take into account that our band room right now in this building is not large enough for your band. You need to be able to provide an appropriate sized band room. So what we're proposing is taking the space that the current weight room is in and renovating that into an appropriately sized band room. It's actually perfect in size, perfect in volume, to be able to build out a really nice band room. So that means we're kicking out the weight room. So the weight room is part of the new addition down at the athletic end. So we're going to build a new appropriate weight room to be able to support the athletics. In addition to the weight room in that addition is a couple more locker rooms that we're definitely short on in this building. The green area where we're pulling that one music room out of in the bottom right, that's going to allow us to expand the wrestling room. So we're going to be able to remove a wall that currently exists between the wrestling room and a music room and really expand that wrestling room into the size that it needs to be. So we're really able to right size and get uses where they need to be in this building, and all of these uses at the end of the day are going to be just as critical when this building is a middle school in the next phase. So at the end of the day, the total additions planned for the high school is 42,500, and the total renovated square footage is 14,700. So when you add up all of those projects that I just went through, it totals up to just under that $64 million mark. We're just under so that we can have some dollars, because we know we're keeping Salem Elementary online for this first phase. We've got to have some dollars there to be able to allow us to continue to maintain that building until a new high school is built. So we do have some dollars set aside to allow us to address some of those critical needs over at Salem. So that's it. I just walked through the whole master plan with everybody. There's a lot there, and you probably have questions, but I will be out there, my team will be out there, Greg will be out in the cafeteria, and we are happy to answer any questions. Greg, is there anything else?
I wanted to just talk a little bit about the other aspect of the financing piece to this. We are in the midst of becoming an ELP district. The Ohio Facilities Construction Commission has a program. It's, I think the acronym ELP is Expedited Local Leadership Program, Partnership Program. And while we're not eligible at this time to do an OFCC project where we would gain partial reimbursement for what we're currently doing, we can become an ELP district, which locks in a reimbursement for what we do now for when we do the next project, which will be an OFCC project. So phase 1B, we anticipate being an OFCC project because we'll be debt capped, and there is no debt cap if you do a project with the state. So at this point, we will be reimbursed 16% of the cost. We won't get that reimbursement until we actually do the OFCC project in phase 1B. So that's a financial piece to this that I wanted people to be aware of. And at this point, we're going to go out in the lobby, and you can stop by if you have questions or comments. We'll be glad to take them.